Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final week of our PowerPoints. This PowerPoint is going to be covering issues within telemental health and overall technology in counseling. Distance counseling can also be known as telebehavioral health, e-counseling, e-therapy, online therapy, cyber counseling, and online counseling. So you might hear people refer to distance counseling with many of these names, and they will have some of their particular nuances, but basically it is referring to counseling done in a medium that is not in person, and we'll talk about some different ways that that can look in your future or current work. There are a few different methods of delivery, including video conferencing, using certain computer programs designed to enhance telemental health provision, and then using mobile applications. So I want you to just take a moment to pause this presentation and think about the ways that technology might be used to facilitate counseling at your practicum sites or maybe at your future internship sites. So just take a moment to kind of ponder how this shows up for you, maybe if it is showing up at all, if there are gaps in this service provision, and how that shapes the way that you might want to engage in distance counseling or telemental health in your future work. There have been many ways that technology has advanced within our personal lives, and it's impacted our personal lives and relationships. Now it has the potential to shift professional relationships. It has potential to maybe enhance these relationships, but there are also dangers in terms of issues like client privacy or confidentiality. So here I've included a couple of pieces of our ethical code in Section H of our ACA Code of Ethics, and you can explore how our ACA Code of Ethics integrates distance counseling and electronic resources within our work. And as time has evolved, our ethics have evolved to include these categories as well. So you can pause and take a moment to read this also. There's also a video that you can explore here that looks at shifts in technology. It's kind of a tongue in cheek, funny video, so please feel free to follow that link as well. Client use of technology has also greatly shifted within the past few years. One of the largest forefronts in which it has shifted is social media. So, looking at social networks, this can be Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. To be quite transparent, I'm very behind on social media usage. I don't use it a lot. So, there are probably so many more that I'm not naming that are out there. However, with client increased use of technology, it requires that we need to talk about social media within our professional disclosure statements and things like that. So I'll touch on that a little bit later. Um, However, we also have an ACA response to the increase of client use of technology, specifically to social media, stating that counselors respect the privacy of their clients' presence on social media unless given consent to view such media. However, I might also say that you do not want to engage with clients on social media for many reasons. There can be various ethical issues that can arise from engaging in social media. And again, we will talk a bit about that later. And I would also say if clients want you to engage in their social media, I might find a way for them to bring it into session to work with it in there, but not for you to be engaging in social media outside of your sessions together. However, client needs in our counseling sessions have arisen from their use of technology. Some clients might come to see you for social media addiction. They also might experience some fear of missing out. 18 to 30-year-olds have the highest rates of these, and this is directly linked to social media happenings. There's a link on here that you can follow to see if you are at risk for fear of missing out. There's also increasing social isolation because there's a medium of engagement that can often be very empty for some people, where you can be engaged online but never have those in-person connections. Additionally, rates of cyberbullying have skyrocketed, and as you are probably aware of, as the media covers, some of the impacts of this cyberbullying have been pretty severe, leading to experiences of depression, anxiety, even suicide in some cases. Additionally, sexting is something that, with teenager access to, and even adult access to video and to cameras right at their fingertips at all times of the day or night, without that prefrontal cortex fully developed in adolescence, sometimes teens will send sex to one another, and the implications of this can be pretty enormous. There's a video that is pretty heavy, so be aware if you're going to watch it that it is a pretty emotional video, but it talks about the impact of sexting and that link to cyberbullying. Additionally, there's an increase in rates of insomnia because clients really don't have a bedtime for their technology. So technology is always at their fingertips. I know sometimes when I work with clients, and this is clients of all ages, and they say that they have trouble sleeping, I ask them, well, where are your electronic devices, like your phone, your computer, tablets, etc.? And often they say, well, right by my bed. And so I ask them how they wind down, and they say, well, by looking at my phone or tablet or computer, which we know that that activates the brain and it keeps the brain from starting to shut down and go to sleep. So one, it prevents you from entering into a restful sleep. However, there are also the interruptions of texts, of social media notifications, things like that that come through during the night. I remember having one teenage client who said that they were not getting much sleep, and I asked them why. And they said, well, I'm just having trouble. And so I clarified, and it turned out that their phone was right on their nightstand, and they would answer text or post to social media at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. So some of their depression was actually coming from not actually getting adequate rest. So these are things to check in on, to be aware that social media and technology in various forms are going to have an impact on the overall wellness of our clients. So, with client increase of technology, counselor use of technology has also grown. Distance counseling is something that's relatively new on the counseling front, but it's counseling via video conference or teleconference, through chat and email. There are now credentialing agencies like the Center for Credentialing and Education. They have a distance counseling credential that you can take a course for and then obtain. Most state boards do require licensure to participate in distance counseling. Additionally, the ACA standards detail ways that distance counseling needs to be incorporated into your informed consent. But before I go into informed consent, a piece about voluntary use needs to be reflected on, in terms of clients have a choice to how they participate and if they participate. And this needs to be discussed in your informed consent. For example, in the informed consent, you want to talk to them about the risks and benefits of participating in distance counseling. You also want to let them know where your physical location of your practice is, if you have one. Some counselors don't have a physical location and they only do distance counseling. You'll also want to let them know about distance counseling credentials, any contact information for you, but also for emergency providers. If you are not available and they're experiencing an emergency, whether this be a threat to safety, or any other type of mental health emergency, they need to have a plan as to how they're going to access care if you are not available to them. Additionally, you need to talk about your anticipated response time for emails, and for any type of other communication that you engage in. Additionally, looking at the possibility that technology can fail right in the middle of a session. You can have a secure internet connection and it might go out, and that could be in the middle of a crisis intervention. So clients need to be aware that if technology fails, there is a backup plan of getting back in touch, and you need to talk about how you're going to do that. What are your alternate methods going to be, and how do you go ahead and activate that as quickly as possible? Additionally, you might be in different time zones, so it's important that your clients are aware of your time zone and you're aware of theirs. There might be some cultural or language differences that you need to discuss in that informed consent. And there's also the awareness of insurance companies. Some will reimburse, but some will not. So there might be potential denial of your client's claims. Whether they're self-billing or your billing, you need to have this on the table so that everyone understands that you might not be covered under insurance as a client, but you all will have to work out payment aside from that if it doesn't go through. Additionally, we've talked a bit about social media. So I tend to tell all of my clients I do not engage in any way on social media with them. This is a policy that I have had ever since I started working as a counselor, and I will stand by it because often social media engagement can give a sense of anonymity, which might and also familiarity, which might facilitate some type of initiation of an interaction that is really inappropriate for your counseling relationship. I have had clients before who have messaged me on Facebook, and I do not respond to the message. I do not even open the message. And then when I meet with them the next time in person or via computer, if I'm doing distance counseling, I talk to them, I reinstate. Remember in our informed consent, I said that I would not engage or even recognize any social media contact. I noticed that you reached out to me on social media. I need to set this boundary again, and here's why. So I would say steer clear of social media engagement with clients. And so I have here just an activity for you to do on your own. If you want to take some time to pause your video, you can explore both the pros and the cons for using distance counseling and the pros and the cons for not using distance counseling. This will help you to understand how the material you're learning, paired with your own personal preferences, will shape your future choice to either utilize or not utilize this medium of counseling. So go ahead and pause and think about some of the pros and cons of both potential options for distance counseling. So after you've brainstormed, I want to present some benefits and then some downfalls of using distance counseling. Some benefits include increased accessibility of services. Uh, this can mean that you can serve people with low SES who might have transportation barriers, or who might not be able to get childcare and then can engage in counseling from their home. Additionally, people who have chronic health conditions or disabilities who might not be able to get to your office physically can meet with you through distance counseling. You can also serve clients with social phobias or with clients with limited ability or access to travel. Distance counseling can also address the increase in clients who are seeking services, so the increase in demand and then the gap in supply. You can effectively see clients more hours during the day, even in different time zones if you're using distance counseling, and this can potentially give a more feasible and affordable route of accessing counseling services to clients. Clients also might have increased comfort in sharing because they might feel like there's a little more safety, a little more anonymity because you're not sitting face to face in person. And this also allows for some freedom in scheduling and a reduction in any lost time for traveling to get into counseling. And this is for you and for your clients as well. Also, the prevalence of distance counseling can increase the comfort with the societal norm of counseling and reduce stigma around it. So more clients who might not ordinarily access counseling services now have it at their fingertips, and it might be easier to kind of break through that wall of stigma or some of that societal shame. Some payers will reimburse, and a lot of clients rate distance counseling as similar to face to face counseling in terms of benefits. Now, there are some downfalls. There really, right now, is no reliable way to regulate services. However, there are some organizations, professional organizations within counseling that are doing some work to regulate this within states. They also want to try and regulate provider competence. Often licensure is required, so LPC licensure would be required, and you all are on track to access that. Sometimes you might run across some of the kind of technical nuances or challenges of distance counseling. One of these being that you're not in person, so there might be some erroneous assumptions made on your behalf or on your client's behalf due to the lack of cues that might be there in person. Specifically through email or chat features, you're not going to have audio or visual cues, and so the risk of erroneous assumptions being made is going to increase here. It's going to be less likely when you incorporate a video with audio. Also, there are limitations to secure communication. This needs to be gone over in terms of your informed consent and your professional disclosure statement. You're going to need to process with the client the limitations to confidentiality and to privacy. You also want to make sure that you are only using HIPAA approved software, sites, apps in order to counsel. You don't want to use anything outside of that because that is not secure and you're not engaging with protected health information in an acceptable way. Additionally, there could be some difficulty building some of that rapport or relationship that seems to come more naturally in that face-to-face setting. You also might find that using things like immediacy, addressing interpersonal issues between you and your client, might be a little challenging through distance counseling. And additionally, paired with that is the assessment of any client threat to themselves or others. So, for example, if you're working with a client and they're stating that they're pretty high risk in terms of suicidality, and then your connection cuts out and you haven't been able to complete a thorough suicide assessment, you have to have a plan and ways to get back in touch with that client and assess for the level of threat to see if they need to be referred to other services. And something to add on to that is a client can cut off a video much more easily and more quickly than they can walk out of your office. So if you're having a client who is very high risk and might be resistant to your interventions or to creating a safety plan, something like that, you're going to potentially have to reach out to emergency responders to check in on this client and perform a safety check. So there are a few different concerns here. I haven't gone through all of them, but you can pause and look at any of the additional ones. But it's aware to kind of have a nuanced understanding of the ways that distance counseling can serve your clients in really lovely ways, and then also potentially create some challenge or harm. Clients will also use the internet as an educational tool, and this can be an incredible benefit because they can access websites for support. However, if you are directing them to certain websites, you need to inform them that the materials on the websites might not be monitored for quality or content. There is a chance that the website is more malleable than, for example, a book that is printed and stays the same, so you can vouch that the information is going to remain consistent. So this is something just to be aware of. There are also sites out there that can be incredibly helpful. For example, there are sites that offer support for folks who are feeling like they want to kill themselves or end their lives, and it's support to try and inspire them to live. However, there are other sites out there that might masquerade as support for people trying to make it through a period of strong suicidal ideation. And these sites might encourage suicidality, might encourage someone to take action, and might offer examples of different means of doing so. So you just want to be aware that the internet can be a really lovely tool for education, but also can pose some risk. Also, as a client counselor communication has developed with technology, clients sometimes are engaging through email and text with counselors. Some of the ways that they engage are through appointment reminders, maybe sharing insurance information over email, talking about treatment plans, coping strategies between appointments, things like this. This is all good and well, but you also need to make sure that you are using a secure medium of communication. And you want to recognize that there is a electronic record of your communication that is now out there. You can't ensure security of this information because computers can be hacked, email accounts can be hacked. So we'll talk a bit more about use of email later on, but this is just something to kind of have in your mind. Also, boundaries can blur when texts and emails enter into the counseling relationship, making it seem like you're available at all times of the day or night. You need to be very clear on putting parameters around this. If you are using text, for example, I would encourage using something like Google Voice, not using your personal cell phone, but having a separate line for business. I actually would encourage not using text messages. I usually refrain from texting clients because I think that this leads to potentially less formal ways of engaging, and I request that they either call me or email me if they need to speak between sessions. Additionally, with any emergencies, you have to have policies in writing to contact the local hospital emergency room so that they know how they can access care if they're not able to reach you. You should not make yourself available 24 hours for clients. That is the quickest way to get to burnout and also to get a malpractice suit. Because there's no way to be available all that time. So make sure that they've got wraparound services for if you are not able to answer their email or their text or their call. Another piece that is of utmost importance is making sure that you can verify your client's identity prior to starting counseling. So whether that's a code word that you use before you engage in each telephone session, if it's a video session, you can see them, so it's easier to verify. But if you're texting or emailing or speaking on the phone, you might want to use a code word of some sort. So I have a case example here. I want you to pause and go ahead and read through it, and then we'll spend a little time just talking about some important pieces of this case example. In this case example, there are a few complicating factors here in terms of Ebony being an intensive in-home counselor who's working with Kathy, who does not have a stable or consistent home. Another piece that emerges from this case example is that Kathy talks about a urge to self-harm and then cuts off communication with Ebony, with her counselor. This is something that can happen if you're relying on a phone or the internet or video to do counseling, that clients have control over just hitting a button and ending it right there. And then you, as the counselor, might not be able to assess adequately for safety, as we mentioned before. So there are some limitations of technology to review in this. Can Ebony conduct a true assessment of Kathy's mental state and safety in terms of assessing for affect, tone of voice, and nonverbals? Not by text. She really can't. So Ebony needs to be aware that Kathy might be texting something and experiencing something completely different. Additionally, Ebony needs to ensure that it is Kathy that's texting. And this might require a code word because if Kathy is out of the home or even in a home where there's an abusive relationship with her mother, Kathy might not be the one on her phone. It might be a mother, it might be a family member, it might be somebody else texting in Kathy's place. So Ebony needs to ensure that it is indeed Kathy that she's speaking with. And then if we think about how we can't always rely on cell phone service, what if Ebony misses a text from Kathy, and then maybe Kathy takes some action that could harm herself because Ebony doesn't get the text in time and doesn't respond? These are all things that you need to consider if you're using texting or the phone as a way to communicate. So as you begin to work with clients in this medium, you need to establish a norm for communication. There need to be very clear parameters and a mutual agreement on what this will look like and the limitations for communication of, is it acceptable behavior to hang up the phone? Is it acceptable to stop talking in the middle of a crisis situation? And what are the potential consequences of if that happens? Does the relationship need to be terminated and the client need to be referred to someone in person so that they can actually have a face-to-face interaction that might be more amenable to ensuring the client's safety? So these are just a few things to consider here. And now talking a bit about use of the telephone. We need to be sure that if we are using the telephone, we are protecting client privacy. So like I've said before, using a code word, making sure you've got the correct phone number, and then letting your clients know that phone calls can be intercepted by others, that some people can purposely intercept phone calls, and this can be done electronically, or if the client is in a public space using a cell phone versus being in the private space of their home, they can be heard by passersby. So people who are in and around that public space where the client is, and it should go without saying that the counselor needs to be in a private space, but the client needs to be aware that if they're having a counseling session in public, that their information is no longer private nor confidential. In terms of leaving voicemails, uh, if you are receiving voicemails, you need to have a private access code to your voicemail. Uh, and you need to be sure that you are intentionally handling any written notes while you are listening to your voicemails. So if these are going into your client files, great. But if you're taking them on scrap pieces of paper and there's identifying information on those notes, they need to be shredded and disposed of. They can't just be thrown into the trash can because there is protected client information now on that scrap piece of paper. When you are leaving a voicemail for a client, you need to be aware that that message is permanent. That client can keep that message forever, and you now have no control over who hears the message. So be aware of how you are intentionally phrasing the message and what information you are leaving. For example, often if I leave a message, or actually always if I leave a message, I don't mention to the client that I'm their counselor. I just say, this message is for so and so. This is Whitney Akers calling to check in. And that's all I'll say. If you could please return my call, here's my number. I won't say, this is your counselor calling to talk about X, Y, and Z that you discussed in our counseling session. That would not be appropriate to leave on a message. So we want to really be intentional about how we protect our clients' privacy. I thought this little infographic was a funny one and would also be absolutely horrifying to experience as a client or a counselor. So here are some guidelines for counselor telephone use. I'll let you pause and review these guidelines. These are very important in terms of maintaining the privacy and the confidentiality of clients. So I'll go ahead and let you pause, and then we'll continue after you read this. So, as you are also using another medium like email, be sure that there are levels of security like appropriate passwords, and be aware that email does entail a certain passage of time between messages. So, clients need to know that your responses might not be instantaneous via email. There might be a lag. It's not going to be instant like a chat might be. Additionally, any attachments of written documents, any audio files or images and videos cannot be ensured to remain confidential because emails can be hacked. So let clients know this. There needs to be full disclosure of informed consent and any potential breaches of confidentiality that are outside of your control. Again, here comes the question of boundaries, of how accessible do you want to be to clients, and what does that mean in terms of your liability? So these are questions that you're going to have to ask yourself. Ask supervisors, consult with colleagues, see how different professionals do it in the field as you move throughout your program, and this is going to give you some indication as to how you want to be available via email. Additionally, one thing that I don't want to forget to mention before we move forward is that there is a piece of security when you are using computers. So there is an electronic recording on your computer or server, which means that there's a legal risk due to the creation of a record that is vulnerable to exposure. So please identify this as a limitation to privacy in your informed consent. So here are some advantages and disadvantages to using email, and I'll let you pause so that you can go through some of these pieces. And again, just another cartoon that I thought was a little bit amusing. Now, if you decide to use testing through electronic means, whether this is a completion of tests or checklists online, you need to ensure that these assessments function properly and they can provide clients with accurate results. Something that I think is very important is if clients are testing online and they're not with you to process those results, you have to perform your due diligence in reviewing those results with them, explaining them as they apply directly to the client. Sometimes results can be very general. They can be in language that might not be in layperson terms. So you do need to make sure that if the instrument is intended for self-administration or scoring, that we do not permit unsupervised use. So make sure that you're checking in on that testing and the meaning that clients are making from it. You've also recognized in this program, specifically in this class, that we're now using technology in teaching of counseling courses. So there is that kind of traditional face-to-face education and then online education. And a lot of programs are moving to hybrid or online courses. I would love for you to just take a minute to reflect on your experiences in this course and the way that we've used technology to engage with one another. Some of the benefits and also some of the downfalls of that, because I do think, I myself am partial to meeting in person. However, I think that we extend access by offering hybrid or online courses. And so I think that they really fill a very important and needed gap. However, I do feel that there is a loss in terms of connections, in terms of relationships, and even in terms of some of the processing that can happen in that moment when you're doing that kind of live discussion. So take a moment to just reflect on this, and explore maybe how it's your relationship to technology in the classroom has shifted over the course of your education. Technology is also used in clinical supervision. This occurs in our program as we have a hybrid supervision structure within our practicum and internship classes. There can also be full online supervision structures as well. To engage in distance supervision, you must understand state licensure laws, and this is relevant to your licensure as an LCMHC when you're accruing hours as an LCMHCA. You will need to take necessary precautions to keep client information confidential. Your supervisor should review these with you, and this entails the discussion and submission of client recordings. You can only use a medium of submission that is secure and HIPAA compliant, because using anything outside of that is out of HIPAA compliance and potentially can violate client confidentiality, resulting in client harm or potential lawsuits or loss of licensure for the counselor. Additionally, your supervisor will need to explain to you the risks and ethical considerations of participating in clinical supervision through a distance format. If you ever become a supervisor, you'll need to do the same for your supervisees. So take a moment to think about if you've ever participated in any form of distance supervision or if you plan to do so, and explore the potential benefits and challenges of this modality. This is a growing and changing area, so you can take a moment to envision the ways this. So now we're going to talk a bit about social media use by counselors. And I know that I've talked about this kind of throughout this presentation, but I think that it's very important that we clarify what it means for us as counselors, as professionals, to use social media. So there are some ACA codes in relation to social media use, and one, H6A, states in cases where counselors wish to maintain a personal and professional presence for social media use, separate professional and personal web pages and profiles are created to clearly distinguish between the two kinds of virtual presence. So we are allowed to be counselors and to be people. That is something that is absolutely okay and necessary, vital to our survival, right? But we do need to have a very clear distinction between what our professional presence is on social media and what our personal presence is on social media. So if you are using social media personally, you need to be aware that clients can learn about your personal life, and this might blur some boundaries between being a counselor and being a friend. If there's a setting to turn off that you cannot accept messages from people who are not in your friends list, you might want to do that so that clients cannot message you on social media. You also want to set your privacy settings to the highest level possible to really prevent any non-professional interactions. You will want to make sure that on your personal sites, that you're not accepting clients to be your friends, and that you're also not accepting your friends to be your clients. So you want to make sure that you're really keeping those two worlds very separate. Now, using social media professionally, there are many benefits. You can advertise your business, you can get your name out so that folks know that you are offering services. They can understand which types of services that you're offering, and they can get in touch with you that way. On your professional page, you need to make sure that your information is very accurate. You have all your licenses and certifications listed. You can provide links to NCB LPC, also to NBCC. And then on here, you want to kind of keep that separate as well. So not having your friends that are going to be your clients on there, and not having any crossover or connection between your personal account and your professional account. Another thing that we really don't consider very frequently is the presence of office security systems. For example, like cameras, any guards, any voice systems to request entrance into a space. So I'd love for you to take a moment to think about your thoughts on security systems and how they might be in your place of work. How do they have the potential to maybe compromise the privacy of a client? What might be some effective solutions to this? One thing that you do want to really aim to do in your place of practice is try to minimize intrusion by these systems. And if they are in place, make sure that all clients know that they are. Make sure they know that you have video surveillance in your parking lot or your lobby and waiting room. Even if these cameras are easily seen or not easily seen, clients have a right to know. And this is even if you have in-person security systems, like someone guarding your entrance. It might be someone that your clients know from the community, and they're going to now know that they're receiving counseling. So your clients need to be aware if any of these measures are in place. In terms of electronic record keeping, there has been quite a shift from paper record keeping to electronic. I'm wondering what you all might see in your sites. In my current practice, I keep paper records. I like paper records. They're secure, they're locked behind two locked doors and a file cabinet door that is also locked and has a separate key. But some folks who work on site with me use electronic record keeping measures. Uh, there are some security concerns in terms of electronic record keeping. Cloud computing allows for ease of access, but the counselor does not own this system, and therefore the counselor is going to lack some control to who accesses it. Additionally, with password protected computers, the password can become known to unauthorized individuals, so you need to change your passwords from time to time, keeping the new password um, up to date and intricately designed. You also want to make sure that you don't have a file on your computer. I will admit that early in my days, not as a counselor, but in my undergraduate days, I did have a Word document on my computer that was entitled Passwords. On that, I had all of my passwords for everything that I ever needed. I didn't think anything of it until a dear friend laughed and asked if they could steal my identity. And so I realized, wow, this is not a very smart way to maintain the security of my identity online. So do not keep your passwords stored on your computer or to where they can be found. Don't keep them on little slips of paper that are visible. If you need to keep them somewhere, just make sure that they're secure. Maybe they can be locked in a filing cabinet, something like that, and then shredded when they're disposed of. But there are many measures in terms of training and maintaining the security records that are needed in offices. And this could be something you might advocate for if you find that you're working in a setting where there is not much security maintenance. When you are disposing of confidential computer files, you have to recognize that many of your deleted files can be retrieved by experts. Many people think that it's destroyed or gone when it's deleted, but you must assume that all the information you write on a computer has the potential to be public information. So this is something you've really got to be aware of, that it can be stored in ways that are accessible even if it's not to the naked eye. So here are some guidelines for computerized records. I'll encourage you to go ahead and pause so you can review these guidelines. And I hope that you do consider adopting these if you are using an electronic means of keeping records. So finally, I want to just talk briefly about diversity considerations when using distance counseling or telemental health. Like we mentioned before, really the availability of counseling increases um, for many folks who might not have access when you offer maybe a more cost-effective and a cost-effective means that doesn't require travel. However, we have to also be aware of a different type of privilege that constricts access. So thinking about socioeconomic status, we have to be aware that a lot of people do not have the means to own a computer or to use the internet. So accessibility can be undercut here. Even if we're making this an available means of communication, that's with the assumption that people have access to technology, which is still something that a lot of folks don't. If we look at the breakdown of computer ownership by ethnicity and race, we see that this very much varies. And it also varies with education level. So, with folks who have less than a high school diploma, only 56% have a computer. Additionally, I've got the breakdown for high-speed internet access as well, and you'll see that there's disproportionate access based on race and ethnicity and also on level of education. So this really does have some implications for serving already underserved populations like people of color, folks with low socioeconomic status, and then I would also say ability considerations. If people have different ability statuses that can bar them from using phones or computers, this is something that you need to consider, and how are you going to still meet their needs. However, we have also talked about many benefits with regard to diversity considerations. Sometimes there's grant funding to give clients a technological machines so that they can access distance counseling. So you've just got to be creative in how you construct this process. But I want you to just take a look at this picture because I think that it really does some of the diversity considerations that even though technology is booming and that has really come into our counseling world, it takes a while for technological advances to benefit everybody equally. And that is because not everyone has equal access. So we have come to the end of our slideshow for today. And as we're wrapping up the course, I just want to thank you all for an incredible semester. I look so forward to working with you in the coming semesters as you matriculate through the program. And I have so deeply valued journeying with you and gaining your perspective and insight throughout this course. Thank you so much.